So we will come to order for the Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. Today is Monday, November 6th at 4:30, and in attendance, myself, Council Member Allison Love, and Council Member Bump Roddy. So our first order of business is follow-up discussion regarding tattoo establishments. Jonathan, take it away.
Ma'am, so we talked last time about tattoo separation and the different ways that you might go about tackling separation distance. So you can see at the very top here we have our existing language that has the 300 feet from any other tattoo establishment, and also that 200 feet from any lot that's located in a residential district or any residential dwelling. And that lot part is what makes the measurement a little bit tricky. So I have two options here that would like to suggest that we talked about last time briefly, but here it is in kind of a text format, and then you let us know which you'd like us to draft as a full ordinance and bring to council for a vote. But we do recommend option one, and I'll go over a map in a second, but really that first option is to change the separation to just dwellings. So we're not going to measure it to a lot that's located in a district. And by just doing that one change, now that changes per the ordinance how that gets measured. So it will be measured from the closest wall to the closest wall by default. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. The other is we talked a little bit last time about path of travel as another way to measure separation. We don't use that in any other section of our code, but DHEC uses that for some of theirs. So the language gets a little tricky. I tried to take what the state does there. And this we don't recommend simply because it's very difficult for a prospective tattoo establishment to try to figure out what that means and how to measure that. And it's also difficult for staff to measure it. It's a little bit trickier.
Why would it be so difficult for staff to use that method?
Because it would require to get an exact number. So say someone's really close to whatever the number is, we'd have to have survey information about the measurement and where we're taking it from. And since we're moving across rights of way, we're not going to have an exact number about what that distance is. So it might be okay from a practical perspective when you're talking about a very obvious yes or no, it's not that far. But when it comes to be very close to whether it's allowed or not, that's really difficult to take that measurement.
If we have GIS, doesn't that calculate?
That's all approximation.
Where's anything an exact science these days?
Surveying is, yeah. About as close as you can get. GIS is not, for sure. So here's how these two options play out. So this is the property that was recently of interest. They wanted to locate in 103, this suite right here.
Okay.
So that's where I have all those measurements coming from. So if you went with, so today, they can only be lot line to lot line. So from here to here, has to be more than 200 feet. That's how it works today. Under option one, it would be measured from here to the next dwelling. So here, and that would get you by GIS about 330 feet. So this location would work under option one. Same for that dwelling over there. And every other dwelling is clearly further than that. So that's how option one plays out. Option two, by path of travel, so you would have to measure all, this is how we're going to come across this access road here. We're going to come down here. We're going to go all the way over here. And here is a residential property here. So that's how we're going to measure it. You can see how complicated that gets.
That's DHEC, I mean not DHEC, ABC would, alcohol and beverage control would use that method there. Mm-hmm. That, to me, that's a more reasonable, because there's no way. Because I'm looking for the one that creates the greater distance, obviously. To go through if there was a patch of woods between the end of that building and that residential home, that's not a feasible way to get to that business.
Well, again, when we're talking about use separation, There are different objectives. It's not, and that's why nowhere else in our zoning code do we do by path of travel, because the objective of the separation is not to make it more difficult to walk or to drive to those properties. It's to keep the uses themselves separate by distance or by visual buffer.
Well, if the changes are going to fit kind of what the intent is to create a method that's going to give us the greatest distance, and path of travel is the greater method to use. And you're saying it's difficult. You don't have to do a survey, because I think our GIS system is, unless it came down to 199.9, that's going to require a survey. But I don't think it's going to be that minute.
Right.
If you use
The other aspect of it is, as you can see, that distance gets pretty high pretty fast. So you look at this one, see, and I had two different routes here to the first residence. So here we've got 645 feet up there. We've got 785 feet approximately. So if you do that method of calculation, that 200 feet number doesn't mean anything, because it's going to be very difficult to have anything that doesn't meet that 200. So you might as well just get rid of B altogether.
Remember, get rid of it. If it's not serving a purpose, then get rid of it.
Yeah, and that was what we had talked about last time, and that was our original recommendation is just get rid of B altogether and keep A as it is. But the direction that we got last time was to come up with some alternative language for that.
Because the original intent was not to have a cluster of tattoo, body piercing, tattoo, but that's been achieved because we're saying in A, can't be within 300 feet of another establishment. I think that achieves what we said we wanted or didn't want, per se. And so now to throw in something that would not use I think that I'm a big proponent of the path of travel since learning, because I already knew ABC used it because I've applied for a liquor license before. So knowing that was a more reasonable, and when someone's out looking for a place to locate and they know what the distance has to be, in their mind they can easily say, yeah, there's no way I can get there to the next, whether it's a residential lot or any kind of separation we put in, because I have to go out, hang a left, hang a right. That's common sense distance measure. Now, if it came down to, well, it's 198, you can't find the other 2 feet, all right, well, then somebody's going to have to pay for a survey if they want to contest it that way. But I think our GIS is probably close enough. But it may be a case that comes up, someone's right on that 199 or 299, whatever, that's going to need that extra distance. But if the path of travel is that close, then it probably don't need to be there anyway. If they have to drive out of a parking lot to get to another spot and you still haven't met that 300 feet, you're probably too close anyway. So I think at that point, that should automatically kind of get away from having to have a survey. If it's that tight, I think that I can certainly live with the path of travel. It may require more on staff, it may require extra step on the applicant, but in order to make it, I think, worth the change,
So what about doing option one and just removing the residential part of it? Because a tattoo, they're gonna have to pay for a survey, and that's not cheap.
if it's that close, they'll have to just have the lot surveyed.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If you do not option one and remove B, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
And if you were to go with option 2, I would recommend also increasing the distance, because it is going to be very unlikely that you're going to have a path of travel that is going to be from the door of an establishment to the driveway of a residence that's going to be under that amount anywhere in the county.
Because when I wrote down wall to wall, if you go back a slide, because, for example, so each one of those out parcels have a different address. So
Yep.
somebody could come in and say, well, the closest distance to that whole plaza is right there on that corner spot. But
Yeah,
you would say,
no.
no, but the address is down here.
Well,
on the
so
other
the
end.
way that you would do the measurement from use separation, because each of these suites might have a different use in it, and so clearly this is going to be where the tattoo establishment is, you would measure from the exterior wall of that suite. So that's why that measurement comes from here. Now, if they located over here, that's where you would be measuring from to the nearest residence, which is probably somewhere over there. So you would take that measurement from there, so it'd be even further. So that's why option one, it's not just of the building, it's of the use. So if you've got a multi-suite like you have here, that allows you to have that individualized separation distance for each suite.
Okay. All right.
So I think your best, I think what you're looking for is number one without the residential element.
Okay.
Don't you
Sounds
think that's
dope.
what he sounds like he's looking for?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, because technically that's Shallon Hills. That shopping center could maybe have 2 tattoo parlors in it, under,
Yeah.
because it's long. So, okay,
Okay.
and you just eliminate the residential factor altogether.
So we're just separating now just based on
The use.
similar use, tattoo and piercings. Can't be within the 300. We're not even taking into account measuring to any residential.
If you do number one.
If we do number one.
Well, if you do number one, it would just be from a dwelling as opposed to a lot in a district. So there's nuance there. So you could have a lot in a residential district that doesn't have anything on it, and you'd still have to separate from that. And the way that it gets measured is different if you're measuring from a district than it is from a dwelling. So if you just do 200 feet from a dwelling, that still protects all of the existing dwellings from the same distance, and it's measured wall to wall.
Because 200 feet is not that much.
But it still has
It's
to
not
be in
that
a commercial zoning.
Yeah, it has
big.
to
It
be
has to
right
fit
by
the zoning.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Okay.
still have to fit the zoning.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Well,
1A is what you're looking for.
Yeah, striking out all of B.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I can go with that. I think that gets us there.
Okay, so
And
but what I heard you say was striking out all of B, and that's not listed here, so that would kind of be an
Well-
option 3.
We say at least 200 feet from any residential. Okay. We're still going to that residential dwelling, but you just said if there's a vacant lot,
Yeah, that wouldn't be counted in.
you won't even count that lot. You have to get to the next available
But if you
dwelling.
remove B, you're not even going to a residential. You're not even measuring the residential part of it is not even a factor anymore.
Do we want to keep that in there?
Well,
What's the damage, in or out?
It's a policy preference. It's, is there something that the county gains, whether it's from an aesthetic perspective, from an access perspective, by separating tattoo establishments from existing dwellings or residential districts, or is there not? And having a separation from tattoo establishments is kind of, I think I mentioned to you before, kind of an archaic approach to it.
It is.
And it's not as common these days as it used to be.
Do we
have that separation?
Do we use the separation for CBD?
No.
Do we use it for, what's the separation for alcohol?
No.
Kind of helps my point. Like, why do we have this separation when these are probably not as favorable as
is the
tattoos?
church
probably?
thing on automatic? Like I know there's a church. There's still church, and those separations are still
Yeah,
part of that.
churches, playgrounds, schools, I think,
Yeah.
is DX restriction.
I just
Okay.
think 1A only is the answer.
Okay, so an option 3 then to eliminate B altogether, paragraph B.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Motion that we go with option A only for separation use for
Just-
tattoo establishments.
Do you want to designate that as option
Yeah, we'll
3?
we'll call that option.
Jonathan,
Option.
can you put together a map that just shows the change that'll be made and kind of where, because there's weird all over the place. Can you show, is that hard?
What
to
would
do?
you like the map to show?
What the proposal is approved, how it changes what is currently,
From now to
Yeah.
proposed?
just how it changes there.
Where they could locate
Yeah, just how it
Okay.
changes the existing makeup.
of the whole county, or just that parcel that we kind of have in question.
the impact the change makes.
So that
Show the slide, and I don't think Christie's seen this slide.
Yes.
This one. That demonstrates how you measure what the current proposals are, but what the suggestion is, the only requirement would be 300 feet from another tattoo establishment, correct? Plus all
Are
the
you asking to see
state-
where all they can go in the
Plus
county?
all the
I just
state.
wanna see what this change impacts, yeah.
they would be able to go anywhere where they're allowed, which is LI or no, it's taken out of LI. GC, just GC. So they'd be allowed in GC unless they're within 300 feet of another tattoo establishment.
Or a church, or.
Well, we don't control that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So this now would kind of take on, just in layman's terms, take on the feel of if a liquor store wanted to locate in the same exact property, they would have, because this kind of takes on somewhat the model that ABC uses to permit alcohol's beverage place.
Yeah.
So basically, what's going to happen now, if a liquor store can go there, a tattoo establishment can now go there. Is
But
what I, in my mind is
With the
kind
liquor
of.
license, there is a separation between residential. There is, because we had a hard
Okay.
time getting one at Love's Plaza because of the townhomes that were behind the shop.
But they would still have to meet that distance. It's a
Not from
distance.
residential.
It's a distance, not a zoning.
But say we're removing the residential, we're removing that distance from this. So.
But they still calculate. I'm thinking it's still 300. I think ABC still uses a distance of 300.
Between a residence or between another liquor store?
I know they used the door to door because there was a liquor establishment and a church,
Yeah.
and they had to create a distance
Yeah.
of 300
But they
from
also,
door to door.
so we're removing the distance between a tattoo parlor and a residence.
Residential.
The liquor stores still have a distance between residential and liquor stores. I know City Rock Hill does.
Okay.
I don't think it matters. I just don't think
It doesn't.
I don't think it matters.
Yeah, we don't have any separation for liquor stores.
And so I was trying to make sure we didn't have that separation with tattoo establishments, only based on another tattoo establishment located, because that was kind of the intent. We didn't want 2 or 3 clustered up next door to each other and become a tattoo script model. I think we achieved that still by leaving that language in that they can't locate within the.
And if you wanted them to be limited to one within a strip center, you could even add language like, can only have one on the same parcel, anything like that.
I think
but
that's-
otherwise, the existing language is suitable.
I think that's the distance between the two is suitable. So we just created option 3 that just reflects A out of option 1.
Right.
The only thing that I would ask that
Separate
would
reference.
change is say tattoo and or body piercing establishment. It's just a little minor change. That way they're either together or they're like.
Well, it's a tattoo and body piercing establishment is a term of art in the code. It's a defined term, so we wouldn't want to change that terminology. And the definition, it allows you to be either one or the other or both.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So we got to vote on
So
it?
your motion, do I have a second?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Connectivity. Okay, this is a follow-up of our discussion regarding connectivity. Jonathan?
All right, so just wanted to go through a quick refresher. We saw most of these slides last time, but I added some new ones. So here are the benefits to having an interconnected road network. You reduce your local trips on collector and arterial roads, which are going to be where all the regional through traffic is going. So to the extent that you can keep local trips off of it, you want to do that. The more route options you have, the shorter trips you get. It reduces that overall congestion. You have more opportunities for walking, biking, and not taking your car at all. For public safety, you get your faster response times, more service coverage per station, the more connected your road network is, the lower cost to serve that's associated with that. So at the end of the day, lower taxes there. More route options to respond if something is blocked and you're having an emergency. And for service routes, school buses, trash pickup, home delivery, US mail, all that kind of stuff gets more efficient when you have an interconnected road system. So here's that very simple illustration of how that works. If you've got a well-connected road system, you have so many different options to get where you need to go. So if some of it is blocked, you still have another alternative choice to get there, and you are unlikely to use that regional collector road. Whereas when we go with the cul-de-sac model, you want to go anywhere, you got to go onto the collector, the arterials, to go to any other place. Here's a more detailed illustration of that. So on the top you have your interconnected traditional neighborhood design. On the bottom you have your suburban sprawl. You can see how that trip distribution works. So, you know, if you're coming in off of that regional traffic and you're making your way into that traditional neighborhood, there are all of your trips. So it looks the same to start with. But then if you want to go anywhere else in that interconnected traditional neighborhood, it's very easy to go from any of those other locations, whether it's your home, your work, or your shopping. All of those destinations, you can stay off of the arterial there. But if you're doing that same kind of trip with that cul-de-sac model, every single trip you got to go onto that arterial, and you're adding it to that regional traffic congestion. So here's how that impacts your, this is an example of fire service. So on the left you've got your very connected grid of streets. On your right, this is much better connected than the county's transportation network looks like today, but definitely inferior to the connectivity on the left. So you can see in that blue shaded area how that response time shrinks when you have a less connected road network. So your response times are going to be poor, and in theory you should be building more fire stations to have that response time, that level of service remain the same. So our connectivity goals come directly from our comp plan. So here are a few of them here. We're trying to provide an efficient transportation system, and we're trying to maintain the safety and efficiency of that system. And so that leads directly into implementation, and this is language of the code provision that is asking for the connections, the connectivity. So all that purpose statement is derived directly from the comp plan language. So it will allow flexibility in route choices, enhance the ability of emergency responders to access neighborhoods. All that is directly in the language. So we talked a lot last meeting about the concerns about cut-through traffic. So there's a perception that local residential roads are going to be used heavily for through traffic that's more suited to collectors than other major roads. So it's certainly true that with every new connection comes more route options, and you're going to have the potential for trips that you didn't have before if you're a property that's been there for a while. So there is a potential for trip increases on existing roads not previously experienced. But there are some strategies that you have in designing new development and in your code requirements that can mitigate that potential for adding unintentional cut-through trips. So the bottom line is you make it undesired as an option for your route. So things like lower posted speeds, narrower street design, non-linear design, short blocks, 3 or 4-way intersections, traffic circles, street trees, unmarked lanes, stop signs, on-street parking, and speed tables or other speed impediments. So all of those serve to make that option of potentially cutting through a neighborhood suboptimal. So you're not going to bother because you know how much of a pain it is. You might try it once, but probably not again.
So we want to encourage it on slides 1 through 4, and we want to discourage it by making it where they don't want to go, where people don't want to go through there.
No, so the point of connectivity is not speed. So all of these things are to lower the speed so that it's not an option. It's not the best option if you are regional traffic. If you're a neighborhood traffic, you want to go to your neighborhood, you want it to be safe, you want it to be slow, you don't want to have to deal with a whole lot of people that don't live in your neighborhood driving through your neighborhood. That's the point of eliminating the cut-throughs. So all of the public safety concern, all of that is about access to a development, and particularly if there are certain other access areas that are blocked and you've got route choices, and there's of course traffic on a lot of collector streets. So if you can bypass some of that by going at a slower speed through a neighborhood to get
That's
to an
just
emergency.
it. They don't go at a slower speed, and it takes a act of Congress to get speed tables. I mean, just, you know what, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but send me these because, you know, I grew up in a neighborhood over off of Celanese Bypass, and had a Harris Teeter, and we all rode our bikes and played, and you know, we were all over that neighborhood like kids should be, and we haven't moved past kids needing to be able to do that, and people needing to be able to walk their dogs in a neighborhood. But when you connect, and I'm just going to use the Harris Teeter as an example, a Harris Teeter, what if there had been a Harris Teeter on the back side of that neighborhood, and people could come from Celanese Bypass to that Harris Teeter? I mean, we used to be allowed to ride a certain distance where our mom could see us down to the green mailbox. We wouldn't even be allowed to do that now. So I think there's differences of opinion, and I think some of it is from a planner standpoint maybe, and some of it is from a real life, kids need to be able to play in their neighborhood and not have to worry about cut through traffic, and because people don't cut through to go slow, they cut through to get there quicker. And it's very dangerous, and in Lake Wiley especially, I mean, some of the county doesn't have these neighborhoods like we have now. Fort Mill obviously does, but in Lake Wiley, all these neighborhoods, everybody's screaming for speed tables. Everybody is just, I mean, there are no stop signs. They don't stop when there are stop signs, and they're very dangerous neighborhoods. And everybody's cutting through because we're more of a bottleneck. We don't have any other. In other words, we don't have any other ways to cut through. If you're coming down Highway, 274 right there, and you got to get to 55, well, that's the only choice that you can make, except for cutting through these neighborhoods. People cut through the 7-Eleven parking lot. I mean, everybody is looking for a place to cut through, and it totally impacts the quality of life for all of these residents that live here. And I mean, we've built these roads, we've widened these roads, we've approved taxes to pay for wider roads, 274 and 557 in Pole Branch, and then we say, well, we don't want you on that road. We want you to just cut through these neighborhoods.
I don't. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. Let me know.
That's good. It's time.
Okay. One thing I've learned over the years is that when you have speeders in the neighborhood, they usually live in that neighborhood. Now, obviously, we're doing connectivity for a planning standpoint. There's obviously going to be some people that utilize the connectivity for other things. There's no way around that. They're going to do that. But when you're talking about speeders, a lot of them probably live in that neighborhood. And I don't think too many people plot a pathway to get home to plan to cut through a neighborhood. Sometimes if traffic backed up, yeah, it may be, but generically or generally speaking, they're going to take the wider roads, unless of course something happens. Then you look for that alternative. But
And I actually have a lot of slides to cover a lot of that ground.
I thought our time was off, so we have longer than I thought.
A little less rush.
That's a good thing.
So we've got, I've got check marks here next to most of these items, and that's because both the Summerhouse and Tullamore neighborhoods employ all of those check mark strategies to make it a low speed community so that it is unattractive as a cut through choice. Now here is the Harris Teeter site. You can see that connection here to 274. So here's the existing stub out that was planned, and here's that connection to 274. Now, if we're talking about regional traffic, which are going to be your heaviest population of users on a commercial site, it's not going to be the folks immediately in that subdivision. They're certainly going to participate, but the volume of trips are going to be coming from 274 and 55, and they're going to go straight into the site from either of those roads. There is no reason anyone from coming north, south, east, and west on either of those two roads would cut through the subdivision to access that commercial property, because it's located on that intersection. As it should be. Now you might see we've got another non-residential development, Field A Park here. If I were to design this subdivision, Field A Park would be over here and not back here, because you've got that situation where the code is trying to avoid having people trying to come to a huge trip destination through a neighborhood. But that's built as is, so we can't do anything about that. So here are some examples of route choices that people might have. So say you've got someone that's parked at field day. Now that's not the fault of anyone on 274 that field day is located there. And say you've got that parcel further up in the Paddler's Cove subdivision here. So those are your different route options. So they have the option of coming straight out to 274, making a right, making another right down that high-speed wide road, or they can come all the way down here. They can go through most of Tullamore and come out on Catamount, come down this way, or they can continue to go all the way through and then make that connection. I think you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone that's going to prefer to access the commercial
Right.
site through both Tullamore and Summerhouse when they have the option to take two rights on a high-speed road. So here is another parcel here in Summerhouse, kind of wanted to show how that might work. So they have a couple of options, both, all three here, not that big of a deal driving distance wise, but you see if they have that connection available to them, they just drive straight into the Harris Teeter. They don't need to go out onto that arterial. Whereas if you cut that access point off, now they got to go onto those collector roads where they don't need to be necessarily to interfere with that regional traffic. Then I wanted to make another point about the existing access points to 274 through these neighborhoods back here. So those are already in existence today. So any traffic that is accessing 274, 55, in any of the various directions, they're going through those exit points today. And whether or not this connection gets added to, that's the same. So you've got some of these existing homes that are going to have a lot of through traffic from their own neighbors coming past their homes every day as is currently. And so when you're talking about adding that connection, we're really talking about adding 4 more homes that are going to have traffic pass through them compared to everyone else that's got a lot of traffic passing through them on a daily basis. And if you don't have this connection here, where you might have 4 people that are unaccustomed to having their neighbors drive past them on the way to that, they're going to have to go past some other folks. So they're going to have to come through all of these folks, or all of these, or all of those. So your neighborhood traffic, if they are coming from any of those neighborhoods to Harris Teeter, they're going to have to drive by somebody. And it's not really a cut through, it's just an access point to that commercial property. So this brings us to what our connectivity language is today. And there's some exceptions for having those dead-end streets, and there's topography, environmental conditions, property shape, some of those land use relationships. Remember we talked about a couple meetings ago, if it were the inverse, where you had, for some reason, you had a neighborhood here, and you had the Harris Teeter back here, well, we wouldn't want that connection, because we don't want you to drive through that neighborhood to get to a Harris Teeter in the back of it. Because then you have all of your regional traffic going through a neighborhood. So I would describe our language on connectivity as a toe in the water on how a lot of jurisdictions regulate connectivity or require connectivity. There are, this example comes from Richland County, there are more intensive ways to regulate it that I think achieve the goal of street connectivity a lot better than our current code does. A lot of them employ this connectivity index where you calculate all of the links and the nodes, and it comes up with a score ratio, and you need to achieve a certain score ratio in order to be approved. If you don't hit that ratio, well, you got to add connections until you do, or you can't do the development. So that's an example of the next step in connectivity requirements. And I don't think we're quite there yet and looking to try to add those to the code, but I do think what we have is sufficient. And we talked last time about potentially adding some subjectivity to the code, but when it comes to a zoning code, you really don't want to add subjectivity, because if I'm a developer and I go in and there's subjectivity written in there, I don't know what the rules are. So I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to do what it is I'm trying to do vis-a-vis a street connection. or if I'm even required to do one. So if there's a thought to add subjectivity here, I don't know where we might be able to inject that. It might be better just to eliminate the connectivity requirement altogether, and let a developer decide whether they're going to connect to the network or not. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying in terms of having the requirement or adding subjectivity to it. So our recommendation would be to keep the language as we have right now with kind of this bare bones requirement to have connectivity.
It'll take a few more districts to experience before this changes, I can tell. But when they do, 10 years down the way, there'll be more conversation about it. It's not, it might look on paper like the smartest thing, but it's not.
Let me
It's
ask
just
you.
not.
So when a developer comes in and plans that same neighborhood today, we're going to make sure still that there's some connectivity or stub outs for access points for future developments. That's kind of our standard practice.
Yes.
Mhm.
And in your opinion is that we need to keep it this way.
If not, beef it up, but I don't think we're at that point right now.
Okay.
And your beef up were the ones that, the little check marks?
Yeah, this one here.
Now, which county you say this is from?
Richland?
And that's a little more aggressive than what we have right now.
Yes.
So we're not the
No, I'd
high
say
standard
Our
to-
code allows for cul-de-sacs in far more situations than a code with a connectivity index would.
I'll just add to the first one, the one comments that I get are that, that it's mandatory, that you have to find connectivity the way this current code is written, and that there wasn't any discretion. What I heard you say is you don't think there's a way to build in
There
some
is,
flexibility, because it says all proposed systems shall be designed.
right. So underneath that, it allows for the dead end streets, cul-de-sacs, and other permanently dead end streets that do not exceed the maximum block length, blah, 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 blah. So there are the objective criteria right there that allow us to have either a cul-de-sac or a hammerhead turnaround, things that are permanently dead end that eliminate the possibility to have connection, and those are the objective criteria.
What is a land use relationship?
So it's what we talked about before. So if you've got a Harris Teeter or a concrete plant and that is behind a subdivision, you wouldn't want to have that connectivity. Having those two land use relationships that are going to throw all of those trips through a neighborhood that don't need to be there.
because the concrete or that facility will be sitting behind a neighborhood.
Right.
That would make that neighborhood basically the only access point to get
Right.
through to. But in this case, with the proposed Harris Teeter site, there's already access points off the main road. Since
So
this
we
has
did
come
have
up,
an example of how that other requirement works for here. There's yellow jessamine. Is this yellow jessamine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here there's a gulch and a significant topography issue. So this is an existing stub out, and this was supposed to connect here and have a four-way intersection with Pepperwood. But there was such a steep drop-off that we said that met the objective criteria for the topography, and it was not reasonable to have a connection there.
that same neighborhood you just got finished drawing, the one right below it, which one came first?
Between the two different neighborhoods.
Yeah, the one right below where you just.
Tullamore.
So we made sure that some way, somehow, that there was a connector built in there? Okay, so that worked.
And everybody cuts through there to go, everybody cuts through there to go to
Yeah, and
Field
you
Day
can
Park.
see, you can kind of see where these were planned, because here's
It's a little wider,
right-of-way bulb
right.
out where that was a temporary cul-de-sac, and then that connection was made. Same thing here, you can see the right-of-way bulb
Right.
for a temporary cul-de-sac. Now there's a house there, so that connection was made.
Tullamore was built first, but Paddler's Cove was approved first. Paddler's Cove was coming before Tullamore. Isn't that right, Diane? Because Paddler's Cove was part of the 2008.
Yeah, it was way back in 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's died. It came back around 2013-ish.
Did people raise saying about that connection between the two neighborhoods?
They raised hell about the one from Yellow Jasmine, and so did the developer. It was a $2 million connection from Yellow Jasmine into the quietest area of Field Day Park back there on I can't think of the name of the road, but and then the biggest issue right now that we have is when you come in from the top orange arrow up there, the people come into Field Day Park, and so they get down to that middle yellow box at the top, and the traffic through there, there's speed bumps. We've installed speed bumps and everything there after having counters and everything, but the traffic coming through there is crazy. But that's due to Field Day Park being where it is. But the same happens with these other neighborhoods they cut through, and they're one of the highest places for wrecks is below that second arrow right there at the intersection to Autumn Cove. So that road is closed a lot, and people cut through on Broomstick and wind all the way around. They come all the way through all these neighborhoods and come out over here because there is no, like I was trying to say earlier, there is no other road. They can only travel through this area on 55 or 49. So they're wrecks every day, and they cut through these neighborhoods to get to where they're going.
I don't think nobody's going to jump off of, was that 49 to go behind the Harris Teeter to cut through that neighborhood only to come out on, is that 55?
Yeah.
I don't see that being used as a cut through to save time versus coming down past the Harris Teeter and taking a right to get on 55. And I don't see anybody coming up.
the wrecks.
I'm talking about now just because some of the concern is being used as a cut through. I don't see anybody traveling 55, cutting through the neighborhood to go behind the Harris Teeter to come back out on Charlotte Highway and go that way.
Not going that way because they got to make a left on Charlotte Highway and they won't be able to get out.
Okay, so they're not going to cut through coming that way.
It's coming the other way. And school traffic at school time. It's a nightmare because people cut through to get their kids.
Where's the school?
The school is that
Top of the screen.
very top. It's very top above that arrow.
But I don't see changing anything that would change any language that's going to prevent this connection happen or any other like situations for having these stub ups for future connections. If that's what the
I just think
discussion is
neighborhood
about.
to neighborhood's great. I just don't think I don't think commercial of that level should be connected to a neighborhood like that. Unless you've got something like you've got over on Nautical Drive where you've got a whole road and the businesses are on either side of it and they can travel it. It's just a very different. I just don't like listen, I might be one of 7, but I don't like it.
Is the only way to get into Harris Teeter that one? What is that down at the bottom? What's
There's
this
two-
road right here?
there's two
55?
access-
Conceptual plan has
Just
One
that
in
one.
here and here.
Okay, okay, so there's 2 ways.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next one.
So any motion or anything?
No.
do
We're not doing anything to it. We're
Okay.
going to leave it.
Okay, let's get a review of approval process for event venues.
Okay, what would you like to know?
Okay, what is, I know some things were talked about for a new pathway for them, a temporary pathway for event venues that some folks could use, and until the legislation comes about.
So last I had heard about this topic being added to the agenda was that some folks were asking if they could get a zoning approval to have an event venue use if they didn't use the building. That was my understanding. So the answer to that is yes. So what we would do, and we already have one of those, the gentleman actually just didn't have any buildings. So
Okay.
that's what he does currently. So they still have to get tent permits and all that kind of stuff. But if they apply for a zoning application, whether that's the special exception or that's given on venue size, or it's going to be the administrative process that staff can approve, we would be able to approve it on the condition that they not use that building if it's part of their plan to not use the building until such time that they either want to use it and get the approval or what have you.
Or something happens legislatively.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so they would just contact you? Who do they contact?
They would contact our zoning staff, yep, so they would submit their application like they would.
Is there gonna be an application that is gonna take that looks different than what they have now?
No. Nope, so they would just
Okay.
need to, if they're going to commit to not using a building that's not permitted for assembly as a
Mhm,
use,
mhm.
then they need to include that as part of their application package, that we don't intend to use.
How are
this
they gonna
building.
know this?
They can do that at any time, they can do that now.
I know, I'm saying how,
Not included.
This is not a change in policy.
well, they don't know that they can do that. How do they know that they can do that? That they can put on that application that they would not use the building and that it would only
If you'd like us to
be.
notify them, all of the folks that
I
have
think
pending
that,
applications.
I
that
think
they
there
can do
needs
that.
to be,
How many people who we know of who were having an issue are operating now on any kind of basis, whether it's temporary, permanent, or whatever? Because it feels, I'm getting the sense that we just kind of wiped that whole thought process out of people being able to use their property of some kind of secondary use or ancillary use on their own property. Anybody operating these event venues now?
Yeah, we have several that are operating there.
Well, Venue Natural is operating, and that's the one that Jonathan mentioned that has the tent permit. So in fact, I think they came in actually not too long ago and applied for a tent permit. I don't know if any
So
others.
What's a tent permit look like? So we have to.
I mean, it's an easy application process. I think it really is just building and fire that look at it, and they want to, essentially they just want to make sure that it's going to be anchored down to the ground correctly,
Ingress, egress.
and ingress and egress, that folks are going to be able to get in and out. Because sometimes tents have the flaps to make sure they're rolled up right and that sort of stuff.
So does that permit kick in at a certain size? Because if I'm going out in my backyard and I live in the county, I want to pitch a 20 by 30 or 10 by 20, I had to call the county up and get a permit?
No,
Is
it's
that
a
something
commercial
new?
event. It's
Oh,
like for
okay.
commercials
What-
stuff. So Ross had one for an event they had a year or two ago up in 4 Mill where they had a big tent they rented from, I can't remember the name of the place.
But at what size are we expecting people? Would we expect somebody to come in and get a tent permit to put on their property? Would that be on, let's say, Gala Fairs, if they were pitching a tent?
Yeah, it was good.
So they would get the permit or the resident have to get the permit?
I don't remember.
Either one.
Either one. This,
To be honest, we don't get a lot of
we
them.
don't get a lot of
Okay.
This isn't
So,
something we really.
yeah, it's
Probably because people don't know they have to get
Right.
one to come in.
Yeah.
I'm fishing a tent on my property. Ooh, why do I?
Most
Well,
of the
that's a
time-
little
most of the
different,
time
an
they're
easy
up
up type
and
deal.
done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we aren't.
No.
Of all the people that were in violation, how, I think that one's a new one, the natural.
No, they've been.
The ones that were in violation, have any of those been approved yet?
the Venue Natural was.
Venue Natural has been approved. Oh gosh, I know I just approved another one the other day.
Red Boot was really close, I think.
Chantilly is going to be really close from a zoning perspective. Gosh, I did approve one from zoning. Oh, I can't remember what that one was.
Are you saying the Chantilly's gonna be really close based without having to sign something that they're not using their building, or you mean if they're not using their building?
No, very close to getting approval. They
From a
submit
zoning
from a zoning
standpoint.
standpoint.
With-
Use approved.
to be able
Building
to-
issues, another issue that they're dealing with, and their attorney with our building official. And in fact, I think there's a meeting this week,
Yeah.
maybe.
Okay.
Is there, so the exception, the ag exemption, the one that I think the legislators are receptive to trying to help find a solution to this, because as we understood it, there needed to be a legislative change for you all to be okay with somebody who owns 20 acres, who their house is on it, and they let their barn get rented out 10, 15 times a year. That there needed to be a legislative change. Do you have a specific, can you please tell us what the specific legislative change is that you would need to see to make you feel comfortable to use that ag exemption? so that we know what to ask them for.
So to be clear, the ag exemption doesn't get them out of having a building permit. You still need to have that if you're gonna use your building for assembly. What it gets them out of is changing from the A2 designation to A3. So that's the only separation. All the rest of the building code applies. You still need to get a permit. You still need to have an architect seal your building permit application. All that still applies. The only difference is at how many people do you need to install a sprinkler system?
That's what I was gonna get. The different 8, 2, and 3 deals with the sprinkler system.
Yes, it's 100 people versus
Right.
300.
And that's the current ag regulations for the state, from the state.
Okay.
So what I would like to see happen is I would like for all of the venues who have ever applied, who are now able to be able to say that they're not gonna use their building, they will only use a tent, I'd like for them to be notified. And then they know, hey, we're gonna wipe this slate clean and we're gonna, drop back and punt on being able to use what we really like to be able to do, but we're gonna be able to at least have a tent and do something at this point until we can get the state to back in session and have them look at things. I just think we don't know who to notify, and like I told
Yeah.
Debbie, for us to tell somebody that it's not real official. So I just think y'all need to tell them, just send something to everybody, and then if they've got questions, they can ask questions, and they can apply or they can not apply.
And I think if on the application, if something needs to, like a special something at the bottom, if you agree not to use your building and you're just gonna do all your events outside, there needs to be
So for our zoning compliance application, it's one application for no matter what you're applying. And you submit your plan for what you're gonna do with your use.
Mhm.
So if they don't intend to use the building, all they need to say is, we're not gonna use it. We
Yeah,
wouldn't want
but
to change
how do
that.
they know that they can say that?
They can say that now. We're happy to call them. And let
Okay,
them know.
that's what.
And then
Yeah.
there needs to be something that lets them know that, hey, they may have to get a tent approval too, so that's not the next
Yeah.
thing that comes,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they fill out, they get ready, and the next thing somebody shows up and says, well, didn't get your tent approved.
You didn't get the tent approved.
Yeah, we would, when we approve these things, we would have typically conditions of approval. Sometimes we don't have any, but for any that might come through and say, we're not gonna use this building, we promise, we'll just add that as a condition until such time as legislation changes
Yeah.
or you get your
Okay.
building permit, that you go ahead and go use tents and all that.
Okay.
I would like to ask for specific feedback from staff as to what legislation you all need.
What needs to
see the
change? What needs to change?
What change would,
The
To
state.
allow the existing ones that are in non-compliance to be able to use the A3 exemption.
Without
There
a
is an
building
ag
permit?
exemption, yeah, there's an ag exemption that we don't feel comfortable using right now because we say that the
now,
building code.
so the for agricultural uses and rural activities, that's what you're referring to, that definition in state code. That is what gets you out of A2 and into A3.
Right.
It does not exempt you from getting a building permit altogether. So when you say ag exemption.
No, but it allows you, it does allow you to,
Assemble there? Without the
right,
sprinklers?
without having to have the sprinkler systems. And so there's that, if you are engaged in agritourism, then there is a provision that kicks you out of that. And so I guess what I would like.
And it's related just to the sprinkler.
I think what we're trying to figure out is what do we need to ask the legislature for to help.
What
We've already-
change?
we've already
Move
done
the
that.
So
next
is
I've already
the
done that.
goal to
They don't know
get
that
them
because
out
I
of
talked with them
sprinklering
at the
at a certain
breakfast. They
level, or
don't
is
know
it
what
to
the
get them
change
out of a
was.
building permit?
The A2 to
I think
A3
what
only
I'm trying to figure out
sprinklers.
is, let's hear from you all as to what you need to see changed so that we know that when we're asking the legislative delegation what to fix, that we know what we're, like,
Yes,
we can
and
ask them what to fix.
in order for me to do that, I need to understand what the goal is. So if the goal is to reduce the threshold at which a building needs to be sprinkled, that's one answer. If the goal is to not require a building permit at all from these folks that are using these structures as assembly, that's a different answer. So.
Can you give us
I
those?
think it's.
Can you let us know?
Excuse me. I think it's the latter. I think it's some relief from the building code generally. Now, whether that's, I think the sprinklering is helpful, but in some cases, and they're small, they don't have to do the sprinkling anyway.
Right.
And they still have building code issues.
Right.
So I think it would be more about allowing the use of a true barn that is used for a barn to be used for an assembly on an intermittent basis,
Yeah.
provided it's still a barn.
Yep.
I think it's unlikely that an event that was built as a barn years ago, but
It's
is
gonna meet any
now
code. It's not gonna
built
meet
to
code.
be an event center
It's
is
not gonna
going
meet
to
the
be
code.
exempt from the building.
It's not gonna meet it.
It's not
So-
gonna
I don't know, but I think we can give them some general direction on what would ease the burden on the venues we have in the county.
Yeah. And so the language, that's the goal then, is to try to reduce the burden of having a building permit if you're having these events take place in a barn. Then the language is in the statewide building code. So the building codes council would have to change it, or the legislature would have to overrule them or make some standalone law. But the language there says that if you have two uses that are inside of a building and they are intermittent, so you're gonna be an agricultural use and then you're gonna stop and you're gonna be an event venue, or if they're gonna share the same space, the requirements of both of those occupancies need to be met for the building. So that would be what needs to change. It would need to carve out some exemption there that states otherwise for these event venues.
I was hoping, since we've gone through all this process, and it's been, feels like 2 years now, that we would have come up with some way somehow to give these event venue enthusiasts or people who wanted to do this and offer the service, some way that there was a pathway to get a temporary and not have to meet the overwhelming burden of building codes, sprinklers, because I don't think people are doing this full time with the barn. They're using it sparingly, at best probably 10, 11 times a year. And for someone to have to go back now and retrofit a barn, retrofit for bathrooms, building codes, sprinklers, if we're holding them to that standard, and I guess the term I'm thinking about, we're going to need the state to do some kind of reprieve that says, hey, if you're using your natural barn or this other structure that was, the primary use is this, but if you occasionally want to use it for this, you get some kind of reprieve not to have to meet the burden of all this extra stuff. As someone who's building one today, if you're just going to build it to do this in today, yeah, you should have to meet it today. But if you're
So
using
something like a
yeah.
grandfather clause.
But we should be able to go out to these people's
That
property
exists.
and inspect it to say, hey, yeah, if you tighten up on this and make some modifications here, but not overwhelmingly meet the blueprint building code, trying to create some kind of pathway that they can use it, but it's not, just know that there's not going to be someone in that building 5 days a week. It's sparingly once or twice a month, if that many on average.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think if we don't try to get that pathway established, we're basically just wiping out everybody who had good intentions to do something in a rural setting, who may, and we, instead of trying to make it stretch to fit this one particular category, I would love to see some kind of temporary offer that, hey, yeah, you can use it X number of times, whatever that number is, because it limits how many people and how often it's going to be used. But just to do it this way, we're totally wiping it out. And I don't see anybody going in retrofit and spending bukus of money because they can't afford it, because they're not making that much. But we had a situation years ago. We wanted to go out and shut somebody down for selling tomatoes in their front yard. And Kerwood raised so much hell. Anybody who would have voted to shut that person down would have been ashamed. Kind of get the same feel that, people have their property. To some degree, they should be able to do some things that they want, just not all out. Let them open up a liquor store, but at least to some degree, be able to do some of the things that they enjoy doing and want to do, because it's not a big money maker. I wouldn't oppose. I would suppose, but we have not we've not created a decent pathway for these people to navigate and to get there, to use their properties for these events. So we're basically regulating them out, but saying, hey, if you can build one now that's going to cost you about $2 million, and have an occasional wedding out here twice a month, 3 times a quarter, we're never going to get one. So that's my take on it.
I agree, but
Yeah, and again, it's not us. It's
no, I'm just saying, if you can contact them And if you have to put a section C or D on the application that talks about until legislation, whatever legislation needs to happen, that they could agree to not use their barn and have these events, and that's a pathway. It's a temporary pathway for them.
Well, why don't we just create something and let the state come in and say, no, you can't do that? Whether it's temporary, I mean, on a temporary basis, not a permanent basis. If we say, hey, York County has established a temporary use for.
Yeah, and we can do that, and we have done that.
And let's see.
The problem is the building code, as the county cannot modify the building code. So we are responsible for enforcing the state's building code.
Does building codes apply to temporary uses?
So they're two different things. So the building code regulates the buildings and what goes on inside of the buildings. The zoning code regulates the use of the property. So we can control what the use of the property is and how lenient or strict we want to be on the use of the property. When it comes to the building, how the building is designed and all the points of egress and how those buildings are being used, that's the state.
When it comes to buildings that existed before the event, like basically the grandfather, which is what I hear you saying too, can you craft some language that would make you feel comfortable that we can go to the we need to hear from, we need you guys to tell us what your hurdle is, because you are obviously already approved Meadowview, and that was approved. So there is a provision in there that allows us to do this. We just aren't doing it. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how we can seek a legislative fix if y'all don't tell us exactly what your legislative hurdle is.
Yeah, and I told you the legislative hurdle is that language in the statewide building code. It says if you're having 2 occupancies of a building, so we're talking agricultural, right? So for the folks that are using it as a barn, and also assembly, you have to meet the building code requirements of both. You can't just say, well, I'm assembly, so I don't need to bother with agriculture, and vice versa. You have to meet both.
Right.
It's
And
the language that we need to change.
nobody's trying to create a situation where that you can go around this and avoid commercial code, but I think there's a lot of people, baby barn folks that have been doing this for years and years. I think when council approved this change, they understood and thought that it was to allow these things to happen, including Windy Hill. It wasn't to exclude them. It was to grandfather them in and say, hey, we've now got these new rules. You got to meet commercial code on all of these things. You can't go out here and build something and accidentally, after the fact, say and use it full time for that purpose.
I think
But what I'm hearing Bump say, and I think what I'm hearing everybody say, is how do we fix this problem, and what is it that we need to be asking from the legislators to fix it that causes you an issue? I think David calculated it.
the issue is, if the building code applies to the building, it applies, and we can't get them out of that. Now, if somehow the state legislatures can say it doesn't apply to that building, temporary or otherwise, then that's fine. But we can't make that call. If it requires a
How can
building
we ask
permit-
them?
Pardon me?
How can we ask them
The state?
to do that?
I mean, that's a.
For temporary use, because we want to. I think the pathway is
But
to go in under
this code
temporary.
makes no distinction as to whether it's temporary or not.
Okay.
If you're going to use it for assembly, the building code has to, it applies. And that's what I'm saying. If it applies, it applies. We don't get to make a judgment call on when the building code applies and when it doesn't. Temporary or not, if it's used for that, then the building code applies to it. And that's determination made by the building code official, based on the state building code that we have to adopt. If we don't have any flexibility in what we adopt, if we're gonna have a building code, we have to adopt the one approved by the state. Now, they may be able to make some concessions for temporary uses or something like that, but that would have to be made at the state level.
Well, let's ask for
Say,
that.
concessions for temporary use.
But we can't make those
Yeah, I
concessions.
think
Yeah,
that
but I'm
we have
saying
to
the
formulate a question to
legislation.
ask them
Yeah.
to fix
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to send
Yes.
you the problematic provisions.
Okay.
In the meantime. Okay, so you know,
Yeah, we have the list.
You get in
Rachel's
touch
taking
with
notes back
them.
there. She's got it.
okay,
Need another pen?
I'm good, thank you.
okay,
All right.
okay, I trust that will be okay. Okay, so we have minutes from the September 13th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Move that we accept the minutes as written, barring any changes.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can I add one more thing to the agenda? I wrote on here early in the meeting, baby names. I want to discuss some baby names for the, I'm just kidding. Well, congratulations on the
Yes.
upcoming baby.
Thank you.
Hope you have a healthy,
I'm excited / terrified.
Yeah.
all right.
Okay,
You can go.
do we have anything for executive session? Executive
No.
session? Okay. Do I have?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. We're done. Okay,
We're
what
done.
time is it? 5:36.
5:36.
We adjourned.